Hey, welcome to the video. In this one, I want to break down how we helped a client go from $100,000 a month to $250,000 a month in the space of 3 months. They were running a consulting business. There was two of them, two founders. And basically what their business looked like is they had a CEO who was like the face of the company, and then they had a COO who was like kind of operations and marketing. Below them, they had quite a big team. So they had fulfillment in place, and they also had a sales team. Now, the problem they had, and the reason they were stuck at 100K, wasn't because of their fulfillment. They actually had the capacity to do 250K already in terms of fulfilling on clients. That wasn't the issue. They weren't getting enough sales, and there were two kind of major problems that we solved for them. So this is kind of like who they had on their team. They had 3 to 5 setters at one time, and the setters were, very dependent on the growth of their business. So their funnel looks like this. They would run ads, and they had a 5-day challenge which they hosted inside a Facebook group. Now, the setters would basically go into the Facebook group and have conversations to qualify people and book them in for calls with the closers. And there were two issues here. One, their ads were really ineffective. And so they were spending 50K a month to do 100K, which a big part of that was because their lead costs were way too high. They were spending $25 to $30 a lead. And I'd basically worked with their competitor prior to working with them. Or their biggest competitor, and I knew for a fact that we could be getting leads for $10 because these weren't super qualified leads. These were kind of pretty generic leads for $30, which wasn't great. So that was a huge issue. I knew that ads needed fixing, but then on the back end, a problem was they had a really high turnover of setters, and the setters were, an integral part. Basically, if the setters weren't performing, then they weren't booking calls and they weren't able to grow the business. The closers were demoralized. The closers obviously weren't getting paid commissions. The business wasn't growing, and it put a load of stress on the founders. The founders, even though when they were doing 100K a month, they were getting paid next to nothing because they had huge expenses. They had, fulfillment team that were sunk costs. They were spending 50K on ads. Obviously, they had software and other things as well, but they had the infrastructure for a bigger business. They just didn't know what to do to grow it. So first of all, what we did is we created a process that wasn't so dependent on setters. The setters were there in the background if needed, but we added one crucial step in. So here, rather than just taking somebody from a lead into the Facebook group, we plugged in a VSL. And this was huge because people would watch this, and the warmest leads that came through would book themselves in for a call without the setter. So we kind of removed the reliance of the setter on that. So basically it was add to VSL. And then on the back end, they still went to the 5-day challenge, and then they still got set. And there was other things going on with email as well, which they weren't optimizing enough. But instead of relying on this to do all the heavy lifting, this was more in the background, and it was more of a bonus to get calls booked. The VSL started doing heavy lifting, and the way we structured the VSL was very short. It was 12 minutes long, but it just spoke to the warmest people in the market. So rather than trying to sell them on like a new idea, what we did is we just positioned them against the competition. And so, as I said, I used to work with one of their competitors, and I had been approached by a couple of people to run ads in this space. The market was Fit Pro mentorship. So it was people who were personal trainers that were trying to go online. And these guys basically did that. They showed them how to take their personal training business online. I had previously done that. If you're new to the channel, I used to be a personal trainer. I took my business online. That was the first online business I ran, was an online health and fitness business. So I understand this market well. I then worked for my business mentor who grew this to 500K a month. And so working internally for that business and kind of doing marketing and sales, I knew all the infrastructure and knew this market really well. And then I'd also seen a lot of competitors in the space as well. So I got approached by a few of those guys at the time, and I could see some of the kind of missing elements here. They were trying to market to people that were very low sophistication, and so there was a lot of people coming through that were broke. And so what we did is instead of trying to sell a new idea, so basically people who are like brand new to the online space, we changed the positioning slightly, and we talked to the issues that they had probably experienced being in other mentorship programs, right? The things that were missing, the support, the accountability, the training, the resources, the structuring their programs, all of those things. And so the VSL was very high level. It was geared towards people who had already invested, they'd already hit a certain level of success, but they wanted to go further. And what happened was we started booking about 10% of leads into calls. And these calls were qualified, right? We had a few qualifying questions before they booked the call. We did a 2-call process. They had like a 15-min qualifier call into a full sales call. So that was the back end, and that's what we fixed in the funnel. The front end, which kind of relates to that, was we just worked on a few things. Creative, targeting, and messaging. And this is pretty much universal. Every business I work with always has similar problems around this. They're creative, and what they were doing with their marketing was they were basically, because they weren't ad experts, they didn't really know what they were doing with ads, even though they were spending $50K a month. They were basically just copying what other people were doing in their space and kind of just shouting at the camera. They were just trying to be loud in their marketing instead of smart. And this isn't a dig at them, like they just weren't, super aware of this at the time. And so what we did was we changed the creative to be, again, like high level. So they did a professional video shoot. We got it looking good, looking, decent, edited well. And then we got the messaging dialed in. So basically, again, instead of talking to absolute beginners, we were talking to people who are a little bit further along the journey, and we spoke to their frustrations, right? So they'd been through these other programs. They got results, but they were kind of left short, right? They got a little bit of the problem solved, but they hadn't seen the full picture. Like maybe they'd just been taught one strategy, but they didn't know how to grow the actual business and run the business properly. And so this is what these guys were helping them with. They're helping them across the board with multiple things, right? So they were speaking to their frustrations in terms of, hey, you've done this, but you're still experiencing these problems. That's their frustration. And so straight away, what that does is it opens a loop in somebody's mind of like, well, this person understands me. What is the solution? And naturally, they're going to click and go through to the landing page. Targeting, what we did, and this is really common. This was a few years ago, but like this was common then, and it's even more obvious now, which is like they had really, really small audiences in terms of their ads. And what that meant, I'm just going to take you down here. What that meant with targeting, off the top of my head, again, this is a few years ago, their audiences were like 100 to 200,000 people. And this was across like the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and UK, right? That is a very, very small audience if you're spending $50,000 a month. Like you burn through that audience really fast. And so what I looked at in their ads manager was their frequency on their ads. And you can check this out really easily. You just go into ads and click on performance and you'll see frequency, right? Anything that's like over kind of 1.2, 1.3 is generally high. Their frequency, from what I remember, was like 2 to 3, which means their creative was just getting shown multiple times to people and they weren't clicking. So the audience was probably getting frustrated and they just didn't want to expand it. So they had really specific targeting to try and hit these people. And they were like, well, we don't want to expand it because we don't want to hit people that aren't a fit, right? There's only a few 100,000 people in this space. Like if we expand it, then we're just going to be hitting loads of randomers. But that's not really how it works. And usually what happens is when you expand the audience, your ads generally perform better if you're in a really, really small audience. So the pixel knows who it's looking for because it has been getting leads. So we expanded the audience to like probably about, I think it was like 10 or 20 times. So it was like, I think we took it to about 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 million, somewhere around that range. It was definitely over 1 million. So it was over 10 times the audience size. And the lead cost dropped, the lead quality carried on the same, but the conversions on the back end increased just because we'd fixed both of those problems in the funnel. And so they went from like $25 to $30 a lead to $10 a lead whilst maintaining quality. Plus, they were getting a load of additional bookings. They were getting 10% additional bookings in the funnel just from the VSL. And those guys that were coming through on the VSL were more qualified because it was speaking to higher level people. And so they went from their closers kind of leaving because they just weren't getting enough sales calls booked and there was no incentive for them, to now their closers' diaries were full and they were closing. I think their offer was between 5 and 8K. They had kind of 2 tiers. And we took them from 100K a month to 250. And this was like a 90-day period. Now, the other thing to mention here is we didn't change their ad budget. So they were spending 50K a month, right? They actually were on the higher end. You know, if I was doing this now, it would be a little bit different, a little bit more efficient. And I'll get into that in a sec. But they didn't increase their ad spend. They didn't like really change much in terms of their back end strategy. We just changed a few things on the front end and we're able to optimize this really, really well. So interesting looking at those numbers and breaking that down. I was kind of reflecting on this because I worked with a few higher level clients who have done this, and it's common that when you scale, you get really busy, you do a million different things, and then they made the mistake of hiring a cheap media buyer. So the media buying, the marketing on the front end was like one of the most important things. Like everything was downstream of lead generation because they were running ads, and they had a cheap media buyer they hired who didn't really know what they were doing, and they were learning outdated strategies and they weren't getting training, they weren't staying on top of the game, and their ads suffered because of it. Then on the back end, because they were so reliant on the setters, again, their business was very volatile. Like some months were good, some months were bad. It just wasn't consistent because the setters weren't consistent. They were really reliant on somebody who was in quite a volatile position, right? It's quite a low paid position as setter. So if your whole business relies on somebody who isn't well paid, that's not a very reliable thing. And so that's how we fix their business. And there are a few things I would change today if I was running this. If I was running ads for the exact same offer, I would definitely change things a little bit. One thing, they could go higher end in the market. So the Fit Pro market is very saturated now. There's loads of people doing this, and there were quite a lot of competitors at the time as well. But you know, there's even more now. I see them all the time. So I'd go higher end in the market rather than trying to speak to beginners for their high level program. And then I would add in more low ticket offers for the lower end, because they were trying to cater too much on their high ticket for the low end of the market, meaning it was a lot of pressure selling because these guys didn't have a lot of money. They weren't making a lot of money and they were trying to sell something for $5,000 to $8,000. So I would focus on the higher end of the market and charge more, because these guys, although they're paying more on the front end, they're also more likely to stick around and pay a lot more over time. So the LTV, like the lifetime value of a client, could be worth 20 to 30K if done right, versus like 5K. So you get a lot more out of your marketing. Then on the low ticket, you can have an ascension model to a lower end program that's, you know, it could still be like a membership or MRR and builds over time, but it's less pressure on the client. If somebody's like a beginner, then you know, trying to get them to charge, or trying to charge them high ticket and putting all this pressure on them to get results in like 8 to 12 weeks is very, very hard. So I wouldn't do that if I was moving forward. That's on their offer side. Their ad side, the one thing that they really kind of drop the ball on, which, you know, you do see is, and this is what I call, if you check out my content on this, reverse organic. So putting much more emphasis into the CEO doing content. They basically fell into this trap where they decided they wanted to grow a company to sell it. And this was not the kind of business that is easy to sell. Like maybe you can, but a lot of people can't sell businesses like this. And so they tried to step away from doing loads of content and personal branding because they were saying, well, we want to grow it as more as a brand that we can sell. And then it didn't work out like that. It just flopped on the back end when it came to them trying to sell it. You know, long story short, they burnt out with this business, and then they did a kind of Hail Mary at the end where they packaged up all of their offers into a $500 offer, and then they made a few $100,000 and walked away from the business. So that's kind of what they did to finish this, because they couldn't sell it. They'd been through a few people, they'd spoken to a load of different experts, and then basically just got told the same thing, which this is not a sellable business. So CEO content, right? Like go really hard on this, because on the back end, you know, if you can grow a brand, especially in a niched space like this, it's not hard to stand out. So back end, growing the brand and from there, you're going to get higher returns from your ads because you're building more trust and relationships with people who opt in and don't buy straight away. But then you're also going to get organic reach over time as well, which just gives you more opportunity to generate warm leads, warm traffic, and it just gives you another place to go, because they were spending a lot of money on ads. Most of the clients I work with now don't have returns like that. Their returns are much higher because they have this reverse organic process in place, and they're not just optimizing for front end sales, but they are building trust and reciprocity on the back end as well. So that's everything I would do if I was trying to scale from 100 to 250K now, and I was working with a similar type of business, to really optimize this as much as possible. And this is kind of what I do in my own business. This is what we kind of build out for clients as well. And right now, if you're running ads, maybe they're not efficient, or maybe you're looking at running ads, you're doing organic, you're kind of tapping out your organic audience, and you're looking to scale things further, you want to hit 100 or maybe even 250 a month, then click the link below. Check out my offer. It's going to break down everything we do. This is a done for you offer. So we come in, we build out the sales funnel, we run the ads, we basically manage the entire marketing, and we consult with you around the back end content, like the reverse organic side, to optimize everything you have in place. And from there, really help you scale your client acquisition. If that's something you're interested in, click the link below and it will walk you through. It's like a 10-minute video, and it will go through all the details there. That's for people who are doing over 20K a month, like as a minimum, because you need to have ad spend, you need to have a validated offer. Like if you're a beginner, if you're under 20K a month, it's just not going to be the right fit for you. But feel free to check out more of the content on my channel, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.